What's going on, guys? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I want to teach you everything you need to know about Spring Boot Actuator. Spring Boot Actuator is a sub-project within Spring Boot that allows you to monitor the state of your application. So you can expose a bunch of endpoints, and then basically you can just build awesome dashboards like the one that you will build in this course. So this course is actually brought to you by Junior from GetRaised. So go ahead and check him out because he has really awesome content on Spring Boot and Angular. So he has really good content. I'm going to leave a link where you can go and check him out. So if you're new to my channel, go ahead and subscribe. Also, if you're not part of the Amigoscode community, go ahead and join. The community is growing. A lot of people have been benefiting from these courses. A lot of people have been securing jobs, which is really interesting. So people from Brazil, Africa, America, Europe, it's really giving me a boost to keep on providing awesome content like this. Without further ado, let's kick off this course.
I wanted to go over the application that we're going to be building in this course. And what I'm going to be showing you is only the front-end application. So that's the application that the user is going to see, or the admin users are going to see, because they're going to be the one to have access to the admin dashboard. But there's a whole back-end application that is built using Spring Boot and the actuator that is just code, and I'm not going to be showing it here. So the only thing I'm going to be showing here is the actual front-end application, which the end user will actually be using. So as you can see, what you're looking at is the monitoring dashboard. But before I go and explain what's going on here, I want to at least give you some ideas about the scenario that I had in my head when I built this. So let's go over to the next tab. And this is a separate application altogether. And you can think of it as an employee manager. So in a lot of the companies out there, they have like some internal tools or some internal website that they use to just manage all of their employees. So we're trying to recreate the same scenario here. So let's say you work in some company or some organization, and they just have this internal tool where they keep track of their employees. So as you can see, that's exactly what this app is. So you can come in here and add a new employee. So I can add like John Doe, and let's say this is johnraised.com, and let's say this guy's a new React.js developer. So we can do React.js, and let's give him some phone number and then some picture URL, and then save. As you can see, now we have John Doe here added in our list. And of course, since this is an employee manager application, you already know we can like edit an employee. So I can come here and say, hey, this guy's a middle name now or something, or maybe the last name changed to Suarez or something, and save. You can see now it's Suarez. And of course, we can delete an employee. So I can click here, and then I get this confirmation. And if I click no, nothing happens. If I click yes, then the employee is deleted. And lastly, we can search an employee. So I can put Ed. As you can see, as I type in, the list is filtering, or Scarlett. As you can see, the list is filtering. So those are just little features that I just added to this just to, give it some sense. So there might be 2 or 3 people on the team, and they're responsible to just manage this application here. So that's one thing. Now, the admin will monitor this application using this tool right here, which is what we're going to be building in this course. So I'm not going to be building this application in this course, but I'll give you the code for it. I'll just give you the code for this front end. It's using the same backend, but this is what we're going to be building, which is this dashboard. And now let's go over what this dashboard is telling us. So on top in the navigation bar, you have the name of the application. So that's the system monitoring dashboard. I mean, this is just a name I came up with. You can pretty much name this whatever you want. And then in the middle, we have some more useful information. So the first one is the system, and that's just the overall system information. So if the system is up, that's good. Everything is good. If anything is down, like your database is down or something like that, then this is going to be down. Okay. And I'm going to show you an example of that. The second piece of information is the database. So here it tells you what database is being used. In our case, that's MySQL. And it also tells you the status of that database. And this is up. So our database is good. Next one is the disk space, and that's just the disk space available for the Java virtual machine. This is useful information. Again, you can check this out and say, hey, maybe we're running out of space, we need a bigger server, or maybe at a certain period of time there's just so many requests coming in and you're running out of space or something like that. So this is what that is. And then the next one is the number of processors available to the Java virtual machine. So that will tell you how many processors you have running, etc. So whoever builds some application, they might say, hey, whatever server this application is running on, we need to have that much space. We need to have at least 3 processors and things like that. So this is just useful information, the typical type of information you would see in a dashboard. And then lastly, we have the uptime of the system. So that's how long the system's been running. And this is updating real time, as you can see here by the second. So that's just some useful information right off the bat, right on top, you can just check out. And then we have a bunch of card where we have some of the most common HTTP code, and we can check to see how many responses we got that were good or bad or something like that. So first one is 200 and we get 200 responses. So that's good, which is why everything is all green. And then we have 404 and then 400 and then 500. So 500 would be like bad because it's just internal server error. So if that would be something you would definitely want to check out if you see like, hey, you're getting a spike in 500 response. And then below we have our chart. So this is just for better visual representation. As you can see, all of our requests have been successful, and we're gonna change that in a second. I'm gonna send some bad requests, and then you're gonna see how those charts are gonna change. And I'm using a very popular JavaScript library that we're gonna go over in this course to build this chart. Super easy, super powerful. And then below we have a list of all the HTTP traces. So it's not just those 4 HTTP response code that are here. All of the HTTP response or requests are here. And you can see we have timestamp, which is when the actual request was sent. And then we have the method, if it's get or post or whatever. And then we have the time it took, which is in the first case 22 milliseconds. And then we have the status of the response, which is 200, and then the actual URI or the resource that they try to access, which is just the employee all, which is what we did when we refresh this page. We call this endpoint right here. And I can also click on this. I can either click on the I or just click anywhere on that specific row just to see more detailed information. As you can see, even tell us the user agent. In that case, that was Chrome because I just used Chrome. And you're gonna see how this is gonna change when I start using Postman and things like that. And then the response, we can check it out. 200 response and the date and some content type information and where the request originated. In that case, localhost 4200, which is this application right here. Okay, so this is what this is. And then we have pagination, so you can go through different pages. I'm only showing 10 entries at a time in every single page, so you can go into different pages and etc. So now what would happen if the system is down, or let's say our MySQL database is down or something like that? So I've already opened my services and I have MySQL here, so I have it selected. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop MySQL, and then you're gonna see how this is gonna change. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop it, and let's see what's gonna happen. MySQL is now stopped. The service is no longer available, which means the backend will try to access the service and it won't have access to it because the service is down. So let's see now how this is what's gonna happen in our monitoring dashboard. So you can see now, I didn't even have to refresh. And now our system is down. It doesn't know what the database is because it doesn't have access to it. And the database is down. Okay, everything else is good. Our disk is good, processor is good. But now our system is down. So as someone watching this will come in and say, oh, something is wrong. Let me call the admin or something like that. I'm just trying to put this into context for you. So that's what happened. So I'm going to go ahead and run this back so that we can continue this video. So I'm going to go ahead and start it back up. I had to pause the video to wait for this to come up. It takes like maybe 30 seconds or something like that. So let's just see what's going to happen. Once it's up, all of this status is going to change. And I'm going to pause the video because I don't want you to, wait for like 45 seconds here for me and me not saying anything. So I'm just going to pause it, and then whenever this is back on, and then I'll come back. So now, I guess it took like 45 seconds or something like that. And then everything is back up. Okay. So you can see now everything is dark, or they're not red anymore. and everything looks good. And then lastly, which I didn't mention when I went over this list, is this to export to Excel. So you might want to like have to run some report, or you might have to like send some information to someone else because they need to see what's going on. So you can just come in here and then click on export to Excel, and we'll just download this as an Excel file, and then you can just open it and just come up. Yes. And you can see we have all of the requests here in this file. So you can just use this and then send some report to someone and say, hey, this is what's happening here, etc., etc. What I want to do now is just generate some bad requests so that you guys can see how this data is going to change. So I'm going to go over to Postman, and this is the same endpoints that this application is calling. So this application in the back is just making the same calls to the same backend application, which is this right here. So if I send this request to get all the employees, as you can see, I have the list of all the employees, which is the same list that you're seeing on here, right? So let's say I put in some wrong URL. So instead of saying all, I put in some O's here, for instance, right? So if I send this request, I get a 404, okay? So because it's not found. Let's send this request a few more times. Okay, so now if we go back to the app, you can see now we have 6404, and you can see those requests here because they didn't go through. You can see we have 404, and you can see the URL that the user is trying to access. So something like this, you would just look at it and say, okay, I need to contact whoever is trying to access my API and tell them, hey, you have the wrong URL, because obviously this is failing because, you know we don't have this route in our application. So let's go back to Postman, and let me go to do a post. So this is a post request to send a new user to add a new user into the application. So I can just remove this request body and then send that request so that it can fill. Okay, as you can see, 400 by request. So I'm going to send it again and again, and go back, scroll up, refresh. You can see now we have 400 requests. As you can see, we have this 3 here. Okay, we just generated them, and you can see our chart is also changing appropriately according to what we're doing. So lastly, I want to send him some 500 requests. So I'm just gonna go back to Postman, and I'm gonna see if I can find some employee that don't exist, like I tried earlier, like this 555 ID. So there's like an endpoint to find an employee, and you have to pass in the ID of that employee. So I'm passing in some ID that I know that don't exist on my system, and I'm just gonna send this request a few times. So 1, 2, 3, just a few times. Okay, so now we should have a few 500 requests. So if I go ahead and refresh, you can see now we have 8 500 requests, and you can see on the list below here, we can see those requests coming in. So this is just a small application, and this is just showing some of the things that you can do using the Spring Boot Actuator. And there's way more you can do with this actuator, but this course will give you a good solid understanding of, not just understanding what the actuator is and how to build it in the backend, but also how some front-end application, which ultimately you would probably build, because it wouldn't make sense to be looking at responses in JSON format like we have here, right? So you would want to have something that's visually appealing and easy to understand, like a dashboard. So that just is very small, simple. There's way more you can do with the actuator. You can even, like, for instance, and those requests that are like 200, you can look at the body and see what information comes in the response body and things like that. There's way more you can do with this tool, but we're gonna put down a good foundation, and hopefully you'll learn something very valuable that you'll be able to use in real time, either for your company, or maybe you're gonna come up with this idea for a company, or maybe you're just gonna do it for your own good or for your own learning. So get ready. I'll see you guys in the next video. I want to talk a little bit about what you need to know going into this course. And since this is a Spring Boot Actuator course, so I'm assuming you know the technologies like Java, Spring, and Spring Boot. So right off the bat, you need to know Java and Spring and Spring Boot. So you need to know those things, because we're not going to go into details into what Java is or what Spring is or what Spring Boot is. We're only going to be focusing on Actuator. And then front-end technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's because we're going to build a front-end application, which is going to be our dashboard, so that we can work with those technologies. And then again, since we're going to be using the framework called Angular, and Angular uses TypeScript, and TypeScript is like a superset of JavaScript, so obviously you need to understand TypeScript and how it works with Angular. And you also need to understand things about Angular like components, services, and things like that. So get all the front end covered. If you don't know a lot about those technologies, it's still fine for you to take the course. You're not going to be stuck or anything, but you just need to understand what's going on. So if you know some JavaScript, but you're not really good with TypeScript, that's fine. You can still follow along. And then of course, Angular, have some phenomenal knowledge about Angular and how it works and what a component is and what is a service and things like that. There's more, there's routing in Angular, there's a bunch of other things, but we're just going to be focusing on just creating our component and the service to call the backend. And then HTTP, because when we call the backend, we're actually going to be making HTTP requests. So it would make sense for you to understand what HTTP is and what requests and response and headers are and all those things, so that you're not completely lost once we start building the front end and then making HTTP calls to the backend. And the next thing is going to be the CLI. So the CLI stands for command line interface, and it can really be whatever command line interface access you have on your computer. So if you're on a Unix based machine like a Linux operating system or Mac, then you can use the terminal. Or if not, then you're on Windows, then you can use the command prompt. So either way, it's still a terminal where you can enter command and the computer can execute those commands. And the reason this is important is because I'm going to be using an HTTP client besides Postman. I'm going to be using an HTTP client that takes command to execute the actual request. And I want to show you how that works. And this is very important because right now, with all the cloud stuff, you have to remotely connect to a server and then do everything you need to do through a command line. So I figured I would show you guys how you can actually make HTTP requests using curls or some other technologies so that you can make HTTP requests over the internet. And then databases. So you need to understand at least the concept of databases. We're not really going to be doing a lot of work with databases, but if you understand what it is and what it's for, and that would make things easier for you, so you don't really get confused once we start putting in a little bit of configuration for our database connectivity. So make sure you guys have at least some knowledge of those technologies. If you know JavaScript and you don't know TypeScript, that's fine. If you know TypeScript, you don't know much about JavaScript, that's still fine too. Whichever one you're comfortable with. At least be a little bit knowledgeable about front-end technologies, and of course Java and Spring Boot, HTML, command line, and databases. So once you have this, you should be good to go, and I will see you guys in the next lecture. I wanted to go over some of the softwares and tools that you'll need for this course. And the first piece of software that you're going to need is going to be Java. So you can just go to java.com and then just click on this download here and then go through the process. Now, coming into this course, I'm assuming you guys already, probably have Java installed on your machines, or you already know how to install all of those things that we're going to be talking about. But I still want to just show you all the tools and all the software that you'll need. So first thing first, since this is a Spring Boot Actuator course, so of course you need to have Java installed on your computer so that you can have the JVM or the Java virtual machine on your computer so that you can run Java code. Once you have the JVM installed or Java installed, then you'll need to have Node.js installed, because we need Node.js to install a package, and that's the only reason we're going to be downloading this software on your computer. But we're not going to be building any Node.js app or anything like that. You just need to install it so that you can have access to the npm or Node Package Manager so that we can install a package that we're going to need for the front-end application or the Angular app. And this package is called the Angular CLI. So as you can see here, you have to do npm install and then Angular CLI so that you can install it everywhere on your computer, so that you can just run ng commands everywhere in every location on your machine. So you need Node.js so that you can have access to npm to install this package, which is the Angular CLI. And what the Angular CLI is, just a command line interface for Angular, and it just helps in developing Angular application. You can create the application, create components and services real quick, and you can run the application, deploy it, run tests, etc. So it's a very handy tool, and I really recommend that you install the Angular CLI, and that's gonna make our whole development process way faster. So that's it for software that you need to have installed in terms of what we're gonna need to be able to build the application. And for my IDE for Java, I'm gonna be using IntelliJ. So you can just go to jetbrains.com, and under tool, you can hover over tools and then just click on IntelliJ IDE. And that should take you to the download for the IntelliJ. So you can just click here to this download, and here you can just install whatever version that you need. I have a paid version. It's not the cheapest software, to be honest, but it's worth it. So you can either install the ultimate or the community version, but you can just use whatever you want. You can use STS, or you can use any other IDE or text editor that you like or for your preference when writing Java code. But I'm just telling you that I'm going to be using the IntelliJ IDE, and I would recommend you use IntelliJ IDE because it's a great tool. And then for the front-end application, I'm going to be using VsCode. It's like one of the most popular these days. So Visual Studio Code is going to be the text editor that I'm going to be using to build the Angular application or the entire front-end application. And again, all of those installs are very easy, very straightforward. You just download the file and then, accept the license agreement and go through the prompts, and then it's installed. And next, I am going to be using this emulator. So it's really a command line tool. You can use the one that you have on your computer by default. So if you have Windows, that's going to be the command line interface, or if you have a Unix base or a Mac, then that's going to be the terminal. So you can use that as well. But I'm just going to be using this cmdir here. So you can just go to cmdir.net and then just install whichever version you need to. And it's just very handy. I just like to use it because, I can zoom in and out, and I can do Control-C, Control-V, and it's just very convenient. There's way more you can do to it. Obviously, this exists for a reason. There's a lot more you can do to it. And another thing is you can run Linux commands or Unix-based commands and Windows commands. So you can do dir to see all of the file and directories, or you can do ls. It will still work, which is pretty handy. And then I'm going to be using MySQL to save some data. Now, we're not going to be doing a lot of database work in this course, but we will be saving some data in a database, and I'm just using MySQL because it's pretty easy and popular. But you can use like PostgreSQL or something else that's very similar to MySQL. That will work as well. So that's pretty much everything you guys need to have. Again, Java, Node.js, because you need to use the Node Package Manager. Once we have the Node Package Manager, you have to run this first command up here so that you can install the Angular CLI. And then for my IDE, I'm going to be using IntelliJ. You can use that, or you can use an IDE of your choice. For the front end, I'm going to be using VsCode, and I'm going to be using this emulator for my terminal, and then I'm going to be using MySQL. So make sure you have those installed, and then you should be good to go. One of the most important questions that we need to answer before we go any further in this course is to define what actually Spring Boot Actuator is. So what exactly is Spring Boot Actuator? So Spring Boot Actuator is just a simple tool that you can use to manage and monitor Spring Boot applications. That's pretty much all there is to it. It's just a simple tool, and you can just use it to manage and monitor your Spring Boot application. And in order to be able to do that, you just have to access some endpoints that are exposed by Spring Boot Actuator over HTTP, which means you'll just send requests to those endpoints and you'll get the information back from Spring Boot Actuator. And there's also another way to do this is by using JMX, and JMX stands for Java Management Extension, and you can just use it just to access the same endpoints that you would access over HTTP. So desktop application, you open it up, and then you'll see the same endpoints that are exposed over HTTP will also be exposed onto that little application, and you can just click on them. You'll see the same information that you would see if you had to access the same endpoints over HTTP. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what Spring Boot Actuator is. There's not really anything complicated. So I'll see you guys in the next one. So how do you integrate Spring Boot Actuator into your application? So let's say you have a Spring Boot application and you want to have access to Spring Boot Actuator endpoints in your application because you're trying to monitor it or manage your application. Well, the Spring Boot team, they've made it very simple, and all you have to do is to add this dependency in your application. So what you're looking at right now is a Maven dependency, and the artifact ID is Spring Boot Starter Actuator, and it's coming from Spring Boot. If you're using Gradle, you can put the Gradle equivalent for this dependency, but that's all you will have to do so that you can have access to Spring Boot Actuator in your application. There's a little bit of configuration that you will still have to do because some of the endpoints, they're not enabled by default because some of them, they expose sensitive information. But once you have this dependency in your application, you should be good to go, and then just put in your configuration to enable or disable, make available whatever actuator endpoints that you really need. So that's pretty much it, and we're gonna actually do this. So we're gonna create a Spring Boot application, and then we're gonna put that dependency in, and we're gonna do our configuration. There's some things you need to know about the configuration, so I'll go over those as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one. In the last lecture, I gave you guys a link to this page so that you can come to the documentation for the Spring Boot Actuator. And I also gave you a PDF version of the same documentation. And the only difference in that PDF version is that it's more detailed in terms of explaining what's in the payload and what everything is doing. So I would highly encourage you to come in here and take a look, because even I am learning from this documentation as well. Obviously, this is a huge documentation, so you'll probably be focusing only on the actuator that you're interested in, so you can see how they work. So again, I would highly encourage you to take a look at the documentation, either using the PDF file that I give you if you really want to know all the little gritty details, or just coming here on the online version where you can get a quick look at, you know, all the actuators that are available to you and what they mean and how to do some configuration and stuff. And something else I wanted to show you is an extension that I'm using on Chrome. So if you look here, you see this little icon here. That's because I'm using this extension called JSON Viewer. So here I have JSON placeholder open. So if you've been doing web development for a while, you've probably seen this JSON placeholder website where you can just use it to make HTTP call. And we can look at this example right here where they say, hey, you can, you know, pass in this URL to the fetch function, which is going to make an HTTP call, and then you can convert the response into a JSON and you can log that response. So I'm going to show you what this extension does. And since this is the fetch API, I can just use that in a console so that I can see what the response I get. So I'm just going to copy this and then right click, go to inspect, and then I go to the console. I'm going to clear this. I don't know what this is. And I'm just going to paste this and put a semicolon there. Let's take a look at an array, because I know this is going to return one item. As you can see, they pass one. So I'm going to remove that one and then press enter. This gives me 200 response. Okay, so you can see like we have every single one of the JSON object in here. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like on my computer because I have that extension. And you can see how it looks right now. You see it's really dark and it's really color coded. So the reason this is important is because when we're gonna take a look at some of the actuator, we're gonna be making call to the backend, and it's gonna come back as an array. And it's gonna look really boring if you don't have that extension or some other extension that can do something similar. So if you go here and you go to option, you can see they have different themes that you can use here for whatever you want. Or whatever you like. I'm using the material because it looks cool, as you can see here, but you can use whatever theme you like. And you can also go to manage extension. If you want to take a look at my configuration, I have the developer mode on, and that's pretty much it. I don't think I did any specific configuration for this. So if you want your browser to look like this every time it's reading some JSON information onto you, then you can just install this extension. But if you don't want to, you can just stick to the default, which is black and white and all in one line. But I found this to be very helpful because, you know, I can clearly see everything, and everything is color coded. When it's a number, you can see it's purple. If it's a string, it's different, and then completed also is a different color. I guess this is some sort of a pink or red or whatever. So you can do that. I just wanted to show you guys that. So now we're gonna start and take a look at some of the configuration that we need to do so that we can start seeing actuator information. So I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm gonna close the tabs that I don't need, and I'm gonna go over to Spring Initializer because I need to bootstrap a Spring Boot application. It's gonna be a Maven project using Java. I'm gonna use the default Spring Boot version, and it's gonna be a jar, and I'm gonna use Java version 8. And here I'm gonna pass get arrays. Well, my domain is a tech domain, so I'm gonna put tech. And I want the package name to just be tech.getArray, and the name of this artifact is going to be employee manager, and I'm going to change the description to employee manager application. And now that I have all of this project metadata information, I'm going to edit my dependency. So the first dependency is going to be web, because it's going to be like a web application, and we need this whole thing to be in a web container so that we can serve it over localhost. And also I'm going to need DevTool, because I'm going to be making changes in the properties file and I don't want to restart the application every single time. So DevTools is like JRebel. It's just a build tool. It will build your application automatically as soon as it detects some file changes. And I'm also going to add the most important one, which is the actuators. So the actuator dependency. And I think I'm going to need MySQL whenever we start building the application. So I'm going to bring in the driver for MySQL. We're going to comment that out, but I'm just putting it in so I don't have to come back here and do that again. So I'm going to go ahead and generate the application and save it. And it's being saved. I'm going to unzip it. Okay, so I unzipped it, and here I'm just gonna navigate inside of that folder, and you can see I have all the boilerplate code here. So I'm gonna double click on this, and IntelliJ is smart enough to see the other folders and file, and it's just gonna open it as a Maven or Spring Boot application. Okay, so the application is up. I'm just gonna go ahead and take a look at the pump file and see what I have. So here's some of the details we're specified here, as you can see, description, artifact ID, and this is the actuator, web, and DevTool. And I'm just gonna comment this one out for now because it's gonna try to find a data source, because we have this driver in the pump file and we don't have this configured yet. So I'm just gonna comment it out, but everything else should be good. Okay, so now let's see what we have in terms of files. And it's going to main Java and this file right here. So this is a typical Spring Boot application. You have a typical Spring Boot application annotation and everything. So at this point we can go ahead and run this application, and let's see what we have. So I'm just going to click on this green arrow here. You can also click up here and it'll just do the same thing. So let's just give this a second to come up and see what we have. Okay, the application is coming up. Let's see. All right, so we're up. Let's take a look to see what we have. So we can see we started on port 8080, and it also tells us that we have 2 endpoint exposed beneath actuator. Okay, and that's because we have the actuator dependency in the pump file. So by default, it just configured the beans for us. Now, the reason we only have 2 endpoints exposed, and this is the health and info endpoints, is because by default for the web, since the web is considered insecure, everything is not exposed. So we have to go in manually and expose all of the other endpoints. So that's why we only have 2 that's exposed under actuator, and we're going to go and take a look at those right now. So let's go back to the browser and let's go to localhost 8080, and then we can go to /actuator and take a look. And you can see we have the health actuator and the endpoint actuator. Okay, so, and we can take a look at the health, for instance. If I click on it, you can see we have the status is up, which is our application health is up, which is good. Okay, if it wasn't good, it would be like down or something. And we can take a look at the info. We shouldn't have anything right now because we didn't put any information for the application, like information about the application, like application name, application description, and things like that. So that's why we don't have anything. But here you are. This is your first Spring Boot Actuator application, and you can see some health information. So in the next lecture, I'm going to show you guys how you can configure this and then show all of the other actuator and some more configuration around that. So I'm going to go back to IntelliJ, and I'm going to put this down a little bit. And I'm going to go into the resource folder or resources, and then go into the properties file. So you can put a property to expose all the other endpoints, and it's called exposure.include. So you have to do management.endpoint.web.exposure.include. Okay, so here you can pass in whatever actuator or endpoints you want to include, not exclude, include. Okay, so you can put, for instance, beans, and then you can put like audit event, and then you can keep going by just adding a comma and then keep going. But we want to expose everything, so we can just put a star. Okay, and we can also exclude, so we can do management.endpoint.web, because we're doing a configuration for web. If it was for JMS, we would just put JMX right here. Okay, and then continue with the rest of this. So this is for web, so we're gonna do web.exposure.exclude. Okay, so we can include everything, meaning we're gonna expose all of the endpoints and then exclude certain ones that we don't need, or we can exclude everything and then we include certain ones that we don't need, like being and then health or whatever. Okay, so that's just a way to be more flexible with this whole thing. So by default, I'm gonna include everything, so I'm gonna expose everything, so I'm not gonna exclude anything. Okay, so this is gonna allow us to see all of the actuator. We're probably not gonna have all of them, because we don't have certain configuration, because the way it works is, for instance, for you to see some session information, you need to have some session configured in the application. And right now we only have like one file. We don't have any session or anything like that, so it's not gonna show us the session endpoint. Okay, so and I think there are a few more, but most of them will be there when we go and check. So let's go ahead and see if we can build this application. So rebuild project, and since we have dev tool, that should recompile everything, and we should be able to take a look in the browser again and refresh that page. We should see something different. So let this come up and let's go back. So if I refresh this, you can now see we have access to all of the endpoints. Okay, so we have the actual actuator, which is the reference to self. As you can see, self, so that's the same link as this one. And we have the beans, we have caches, we have health, info, condition, etc., loggers, etc. Okay, so mapping, so that's all the mappings we have. So if we can take a look at the mappings real quick, you can see that we have all the mappings for the actuator, because that's all the mappings that we have, and that's been creating for us under the hood, that we didn't create in any controller or anything like that. So but once we have our controller and we have our routes configured, they will also show up here, which you can use. So you can see now we have access to all of those endpoints, and you can take a look at each one of them. So we can look at the beans by just clicking on it. You can see all the beans that we have, the scope of those beans, etc., what type they are, etc. So you can see already right out of the box how much information you're getting just by adding just that one dependency in your POM file. So if we go to health real quick, we can see that it says up, but there's a way we can show more information, and we just have to add one more piece of configuration. So if we go back here, and I want to do management.endpoint.health.show details, and I'm going to set this to always. Okay, so this is going to always show all the details of the health endpoint whenever we try to go to it. Let's go ahead and rebuild the project again and let it come up. Okay, so the application is up, and if we go back and refresh, you can see now we have way more information on this. Okay, so there's a lot more information, not just a status of up, then we have more information. If you had some data source or MySQL or something like that configured, then you would also see that information here, which we're going to take a look at in this course. Now, what if you want to add information about the information of the application, right? So there's an info, let's see, it's right here. So there's an info endpoint here. As you can see, it's empty. And here you can put like the version of the application, the name of the application, the description, etc. So how would you do that? So let's go back to the configuration, and I'm just gonna go down and do info.app.name and set a name for the application. So I can do like employee manager application, and I can do info that app that description, and I can put the description, this is an application to manage employees, and I can also put some version, so I can do app that version, and I can set that to some version like 1.0 or something like that. So now if you rebuild, so I'm going to go to build, rebuild project. And again, because we have dev tool, DevTools installed, we don't have to restart the server every single time, which is why I put it in. So we can just rebuild the application and it should pick up those new values. Okay, so now if we go back and refresh, you can see now we have some application about application. So again, I would highly encourage you guys to go over this documentation. Okay, so the thing with Spring Boot Actuator is it's like one of those projects from Spring that's like super straightforward and super easy to pick up. Okay, so you can see everything is very, very straightforward here. And the next lecture, I'm going to show you how you can use JMX to access the same endpoints, like all of those same endpoints that we've been accessing in the browsers, because you can also access them using JMX. And I'm going to show you guys how to do this. So to access the same endpoints, you have to have the JDK installed. If you have JDK installed, you should already have access to something called JConsole, which is the JMX application. So I'm just gonna go over to my menu, and then I'm just gonna do JConsole. And you can see that I can just click on it and run it. So I'm just gonna click it and run it. Now, I have multiple applications running on the computer right now because I'm recording and I'm running applications. JConsole consumes a lot of resources. So I don't know if this is gonna mess up the video or the recording or anything like that. Hopefully not, but let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and open it, and it's open on my other screen. So I'm gonna bring it over. So here it is. Okay, so as we can see our application is right here. Okay, which is this guy right here. Okay. You can see it right here. So we should be able to click on this and then see what's going on, and then connect. And it's saying this is an insecure connection. Yeah, because it's on my local, we don't care. And you can see it's a monitoring tool, and it's giving us a bunch of information about the resources being consumed, memory, class, CPU usage, etc. And that's all in the overview tab, as you can see here. So we have some memory information. You can see down here we have some more information. We have some chart here, and then threads, how many threads we have running and things like that, classes, virtual machine memory. So we have a lot of information about your desktop, and then we have beans. Okay, so that's all the beans that we have created in the application. And what I want to do is go into this one right here, org.springframework.boot. And inside of here, I should have endpoint. Okay, so that's where all of the endpoints are. And you can see we have all the same information. So we can check info again. And you can see here, I can just click on it, and you can see I have the same information. So app name, etc., etc. We can go into the health. So let's click on health. And here's the health. And click on that. And expand that. You can see it's up. So we set the configuration to show us all the details. As you can see, it's pretty much the same information, but it's just presented in a different way. So usually you would use this JConsole or this little application. It's a desktop application. So you would use this to connect to some remote server, because it consumes so many resources. I don't see you using it on the same machine that your application is running on. So you would probably use this to access some remote server in a secure way, because it's pretty secure. Okay, so it's pretty much the same. You can see we have all of the mappings that we have all of the ones. We can just click on it and you can show you all the same information. This is a very long string that it presents to us. So it's pretty much all the same information is here. So that's JConsole implementing JMX, and that's pretty much it. That's everything there is to it. I mean, there's a lot going on here, but it's really a fairly simple application to use because it's a monitoring tool. All you're doing is looking at data and what's going on, and that can be very useful if you're really trying to monitor some application. So I'm gonna stop using this because, as you can see, this is going up. So we're using a lot of CPUs and stuff and memory. So I don't want that to happen. So I'm gonna close it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Another very useful configuration I wanted to show you is how to change this base path here. Okay, so you can see that by default, everything is under Actuator. You can actually override this and put them under whatever you want. So let's go back to the application, and I'm just gonna add in some new configuration. So here I'm gonna do management.endpoints.web.basepath. Okay, and then I can just set this to, let's say, /. admin. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and rebuild this project and just give it a few seconds to rebuild. Okay, all right, so if we go back now and refresh, we get this error because there is no mapping for this. So we have to go under admin. And now you can see we have all the same information. Okay, the only thing is everything is now under admin/D actuator. So admin/head dump, /admin/environment. Before it was /actuator/environment/actuator/config props, but now it's /admin/whatever actuator. So I'm gonna remove this because I'm not gonna use it, but I just wanted to show you guys how you can do this. So again, if you want to be specific in what you want to use, you probably have to go through the documentation, because most developers will only use a certain number of those actuators. I mean, it's going to be rare for someone to use all of them for whatever reason. It's possible, but most people will only use like 5 or 6 or 7 of them so that they can get whatever information that they need. And there's a lot of configuration you can put in for this. You can override how some of those responses come back to you, and I'll show you how to do some of them, but I would highly encourage you again to go over the documentation, because it's where all of this information is. So I'll see you guys in the next one. So let's say you have an application that is running, and the application has 2 different services, and you really want to make sure that those 2 services are running in order for the health of the application to be up. You want to include some additional check to your health check so that you can make sure that the application is actually up. This is something that you will probably have to do a lot, because you're probably going to have something specific running on your application, and unless this specific service or whatever the case might be is running, the application should be down. You want to get a status of down when you check your health information. And typically you would probably want to do that, because when you have custom services, you always want to make sure that those services are running so that you know that your application health is good. So I'm going to show you how you can actually override the health details that you get when you go to the health endpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and revert back to the actuator endpoint. I think I need to rebuild this. So let's go ahead and rebuild it. So build project, and I'm going to close those other tabs that I don't need. And we're going to come back here whenever this build is over and refresh this page. So it looks like it's finished. Let's go back and refresh. Oh, there we go. So you can see that for the health endpoint right here, we have some very good information. But let's say we want to add some additional check, right? Some additional service check, or maybe you might just want to fetch some information from a remote server in order to determine if your application is actually up, or to justify your application health being up. So let's go back to the application. I'm gonna minimize this for a second. So I'm gonna create a new package here. So I'm gonna right click on this, click on new, and then go to package, and I'm gonna call it, let's say, monitoring or something like that. And then here I'm gonna create a new class. So I'm gonna go right click, Java class, and I'm just gonna name this database service. Okay, so let's say we have a service, that's our database service, and we want to make sure that the service is up. And let's say we have another one, which is a logger service. Well, you probably wouldn't want to make sure logger service is up in order for your application health to be good, but just an example. So let's go back to the DB, and all we have to do is to implement the health indicator. So we can implement health indicator. So once we do this, we have to implement one method. So let's go implement method, which is the health method. Okay, so we can put that in. So all we have to do here is to have some check and then return some information. So I can just do private final string, and I'm just gonna set this to DB service. Okay, so that's the name of the service. Okay, so that's the DB service. So what I want to do now is to just do whatever check I might need to do. Okay, so I might have another method below that's like private boolean, and let's say get database health. and I would put my logic in here. So that's what you would do. So you would have this method right here, or something below here, or maybe you would just do it inside of here. Depends on whatever you like. But you might have some other dependency that you bring in here so that you can do some other check in here. Okay, so and then all you have to do is to either return true or false depending on your logic. So here I'm just gonna return true. Okay, so this means that this database is up and it's running, and your logic will determine if this is true or false. But by default, I'm just returning true here just for the sake of this demo. So what I want to do here is to just check to see if my database health is up. So I can just do, actually, I just realized that I have to rename this. So refactor, rename. This is a Boolean, so is good or something. Okay, so we can use this now. So now I can just go here and say if this is true, right? So if my health is good, then I can just return my status is up. So here all I have to return, there's like a very handy method that we can use. So we can just do return health that up, you can see here, and then we can pass in some details. So I can do with details, and I can see, you can see this takes a key value pair. So here I can just pass in the name of the service. So I can do database service. Well, this is a constant, but anyways, I'm gonna refactor this, rename. So I'm just gonna call it database service, and that's the database service. And I need space here, and I can just pass this in here. So I can say for this service, I can say service is running. So if that's not the case, then I will return something else. So here I can just do return, and I'm gonna put the status to down. So instead of up, we do down with detail, and then here I can just say not available. Okay, so this is gonna do the trick for us. And lastly, before I forgot, we have to call build on those so that we can build this. So go down here and then pass in build. So this is gonna do the trick for us. And the most important part of this is gonna be this, which is gonna be your own logic to determine if the DB service is running or if it's not running. So we can do something similar to the logger service. I'm just gonna copy all of this and go here and then go down here and paste it. And I'm just gonna grab this whole thing and put it here, then import. So here I'm just gonna say is logger service good, and then here I'm gonna return false. So I'm gonna pass in the name of this, and I'm gonna call this logger service and logger service, and let's change the string as well. Okay, so now we check to see if the service is running, we return this, otherwise we return the services down. And all we have to do now is to make Spring aware of those changes, is to put component on this so that it can be aware and create the beans for us. And I'm gonna do this for the DB as well, and then save. And now I'm just gonna rebuild the application. So rebuild, and let's take a look. So I'm gonna open this, and as you can see, the build is completed. Let's go back to the health and refresh. You can see now we have more information. So you can see the status for this is down, and this is the database service, and the status is up, and the status is down for this one, but our overall status is down because we have some services that are down. So you can see service is running and service is not available, and that's all the details that we put in on those beans that we just defined right here. So obviously this is a really dummy example because I'm not really doing anything for real. But the most important thing, again, like I mentioned before, is going to be this part right here, because this is the part where you actually do some check. You can actually access the hardware information, so the server information. You can check for all kinds of stuff. Whatever the logic is, you would put it here and then return true or false depending on what you're looking for or what you're expecting to be running or whatever the case might be. There's one last thing I want to show you, and if you take a look at the disk space right here, you can see that in their details they have different key value pairs, right? And in our case, we only added one key value pair right here. As you can see, we have logger service, and then if it's running or if it's not running. But you can see like here, they have different key value pairs, right? So let's say you want to do the same for your custom service. So for the DB service, we might have is database running, and then we might have some other useful information that we want to display as well. And we can pass in as many of those keys and key value pairs as we want. So how would we do this? Well, instead of calling this with detail, which takes just a key and a value, as you can see here, we can call a different one, if I can show you real quick, which is down below, and it takes a map of string and I guess object or whatever else. So you can create this map of string or string and whatever else or object, and then you can pass it in here instead, and then you can have access to have multiple different key value pairs here. So that's how you would do that. I just wanted to point that out to you guys, because when I was using this the first time, I was like, okay, what if I want to pass in more than one key value pair? And then that's when I look, and then I found that the same with details, it's a method overloading that they're doing, and you can pass in different parameters into it. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you guys in the next lecture. What if you want to create your own actuator endpoint? Like you want to have one just like those other ones here, and you want it to return whatever it is that you want it to return. So how would you do this? So let's go back to the application, and in the same package here, I'm just going to create a new class, and I'm just going to call it, let's just call it custom actuator endpoint. Okay, so this is going to be our own actuator endpoint. Now, the first thing you have to do is you have to annotate this with endpoint. And after that, you have to give this an ID. Okay, so I'm going to explain this ID and what it means real quick. So let's say we call this custom. So the reason this ID is very necessary is because you want this endpoint to be identified by this ID here. So this ID is going to represent this extra parameter in the path here. So as you can see, we have actuator, and then we have actuator beans, actuator caches, actuator health, etc., actuator info. So this ID that we put in here is going to be like actuator slash whatever the ID is. So that's why this is super important. And then now what you have to do, you just have to write any method. So I'm just going to do like public, and I'm just going to make this return some object for whatever reason. I'm just going to call it custom endpoint, and you can give this any name you want. You're not overriding anything here. And then you can just return whatever. So let's return some key value pair. So I'm going to be creating a map of string and string. And it doesn't have to be like a collection. It can be anything. You can return an object or some whatever it is you want, some string or whatever the case might be. And let's just call this map, and then set this equal to a new hash map. And then let's say I'm just gonna say map.put. So we're gonna put something in the map, and I'm just gonna say key. Let's say some key, or for whatever reason, whatever I have, and then some value here, right? So I have a key value pair, and then I'm just gonna return that map. Return map. And since I created a map and I return it, so we can just remove that object and then just make it return this type that we define. And then all we have to do here is to annotate this with whatever operation we want to do. So we can have a read operation, which is going to be a get request, and we can have a write operation or delete operation. So in this case, I'm doing a read operation. So I'm going to put read operation on this as the annotation. So the read operation is just going to return some value. As you can see here, we're just creating a map and then returning that map. We could also have like dependency injection here for whatever service that we're using, and then grab stuff from the database or from wherever, and then just return it here. So now that we have this custom, we just have to make sure that Spring Boot is aware of it, or just Spring in general, so that we can make sure the bean is available. So at this point, we can just go to /actuator /custom, and we should be able to see this key value pair here. And Spring is going to take care of mapping just into a JSON object, so we don't have to do anything here. So now I'm just going to refresh this, restart it, and well, not refresh, I have to restart it and then check it out. So let's bring this up a little bit, make sure it's good. Okay, so the application is running. So now if we go back to the browser, and then I'm gonna go ahead and refresh this. So now you can see we have this, make sure you guys can see it. We have this actuator custom here. So if I click this to open it, you can see key value. Okay, so that's how you would do this. So you can also pass parameters to this. You can pass request parameters. So let me show you a quick example real quick. So let's say I need to get some session for someone, and I need to get their username or user ID or session ID or something like that. So I can actually pass a parameter into this. So I can do string username, for instance, and then it's down below. Let's just add another key value pair, and then I'm just gonna do name and then pass in the value here. And I'm just gonna say username. Well, that's supposed to be username, so I'm just gonna call it username. Okay, so we have another key value pair, which is gonna be username, and then we pass in the value here. So let's refresh this. Well, restart this again. Okay, the application is coming up. Okay, so we're up and running. Let's go back to the browser, and here we have the stem custom. Now it's gonna give us an error because we didn't pass all the parameters. So you can see here it says missing parameter username. Okay, so we're just gonna do that. So here I'm gonna say username equals, and I'm just gonna pass my name, so Junior, and you can see here username Junior, and then the key is here. Now, like I said, you can do read operation, you can do write operation, you can bring in a repository here, you can do whatever you want. Now, I wouldn't like return user information using the actual actuator endpoint, because it's more like a monitoring tool. So you can return pieces of information, not like whole information. You would probably use a controller for that. But you can bring in your service in here, your repository in here, grab session information, user information, etc., etc. So this is how you would do this if you wanted to do your own custom Spring Boot Actuator endpoint. And the most important thing is this endpoint annotation here, where you have to give it an ID, and you have to make sure you specify what type of operation that this is gonna do, either a read operation or a delete operation or write operation. So depending on what this method is doing, then you would probably determine what annotation you have to use here. So I hope that was useful to you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. In this section, we're gonna go ahead and build our admin dashboard. Now, this is really just an illustration as far as what you can do with the Spring Boot Actuator. And I just wanted to show you an example of actually how powerful this tool is. So I hope you guys are just as excited as I am, and I'll see you in the next one. Let's go ahead and create the Angular application. So I'm going to go ahead and open my terminal, and I have this page up here just so you remember that you need to have the Angular CLI install, and then you can run those ng commands. So back in my terminal, I'm going to do ng new, and then I'm going to call it admin dashboard. Okay, so now it's asking me for routing. I'm going to do yes, even though we don't necessarily have any routes in this application, but there's a little trick that I want to show you. So I'm going to do yes, and then we're going to stick to CSS for our styling, and we're going to let this finish. So the process has finished. I'm just going to go ahead and navigate in that folder. So I'm going to do cd admin dashboard, and we can take a look at all the files that we have. Another thing I want to do before I leave this is to create a service, because I'm going to need a service to make calls to the backend. So I'm going to do ng generate service, and then I'm going to call it admin dashboard. And what Angular is going to do is just going to add the service at the end of that file. So go ahead and click enter and let this go through. Okay, so how a service has been created. I'm just going to do code dot to open Visual Studio Code in the current folder. And then after that, I want to run the application. So I'm going to do ng serve So it's gonna go ahead first, do code that, and then it's gonna run ngserve. So let's click enter. And I have Visual Studio coming up. And let's see if it's gonna start the application. Okay, the application is compiling. So in the meantime, while this is compiling, I'm just gonna go ahead and take a look at Visual Studio Code and take a look at the project. So I'm gonna expand that. So if we go to source, app, and we should see our service. So you see admin dashboard service right here, and we don't have anything else right now. And then we have the app routing modules and everything else we're supposed to have with the default package for an Angular application. So let's go back here and make sure this is up and running. It's still compiling. The first time it's going to take a little bit longer, but afterwards it should be pretty fast. Okay, so it looks like we're up and running on 4200. So let's go ahead and check that out. 4200, and we should have a default page. Okay, so admin dashboard, and this is the default page. So what I'm going to be doing in the next video is to just create the service. Well, I already created the service, is to just work on the service. So we're going to set up the service and then create the functions that we need to make the calls to the backend to retrieve the admin dashboard data that we need to show on that page. So I'll see you guys in the next one. So let's go back to the application, and I'm going to expand this real quick so I can take a look. So we have two files for our service. So we have the spec file, which is the test file, and then we have the actual service file. So I'm going to delete the spec file, but the spec file is a test file. So testing software is really something you always have to do. Like, it's a must. If you're developing any piece of software in the real world, you definitely have to write what you're looking at here, which is unit tests. So you can't really have an application be deployed in production without having, I mean, I'm sure there's like a lot of people doing that, a lot of developers doing that, but good practice, which is like really enforced good practice, is that you have to write tests. As you can see here, since this the service is empty, like there's nothing in the service, so the people at Google, they already say, hey, if you just have that service and there's nothing in it, at least you have to check that when you create an instance of that service. As you can see here, they're using this test bed inject to create an instance of the service being injected. As you can see, it's defined up here on line 6, and then the before each is gonna run before every single test. So this is the actual test. This is a setup. So it says before each, which means this is gonna run every time before the next test run. So if we had like another one of those, it would run this and then run it, and then it would run this and then run the next one, and then it would run the before each again and then run the next test. So that's what it's doing here. So every time they create a new instance of this admin dashboard service. So even with the default code, they say, hey, we have to check to make sure that this exists if we inject it into anything, because we don't have anything else into this yet. So I have in my list to make a course on testing, both testing Java or Spring application, and I'm talking about unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing, and for the front end as well, using Angular as well. So this is using a library called Jasmine. I guess the people at Google just maybe they just customize it. As you can see, like it's test bed and all that stuff. But this is, if you've been testing JavaScript, you can just look at it and say, okay, this is definitely Jasmine. But I'm gonna make a whole course about testing, because testing in itself is really it's big. So if you're gonna develop some piece of software and you know it's gonna take you like 2 days to finish it, and if someone asks you, hey, how long is it gonna take you, then you should say 4 days, because you have to write unit tests for almost as much as the real code that you have. So for every piece of code that you have to write tests for it, and usually there's going to be more than one logic. So let's say, for instance, if I have one method, and it's a very simple method, it does a very simple thing, and then there's an if statement in it. At least I have to have 2 tests, one when the condition is true and one when the condition is false. So you can see with one method, at least I have to write 2 tests for it. So that's why testing is really a lot, and I haven't seen a lot of material online about testing, but it's coming. I have those in my repertoire. I will be creating testing courses as well, because this is really, if you really want to be like a developer to work at like big companies where they like adhere to real, true, good practice, then you need to know how to test. You can't walk into those companies and not know how to test. You're gonna have a hard time. So for now, we're not gonna do any testing. And I spent a lot of time talking about this, but I just want to make sure you guys understand how crucial it is to test your software. So I'm just gonna delete this file for now, and be on the lookout for like a course about testing. I might make the testing the Spring Boot app first, and then I'll do one course about testing front-end application. But for now, we don't need this spec file, so I'm gonna go ahead and right click and then delete. And another thing I noticed, this name here is kind of long because we have that service added to it, and we can't remove that service because it's a convention from Angular. So I'm just gonna rename it, and I'm just gonna remove the admin and just leave dashboard service. That's yes. So we have the service here. And another thing I want to do is to put this in the folder. We can leave it here, no problem. I just like to it helps me navigate faster to it. So I'm going to right click on this app here, which is the main folder, and I'm going to click on this plus folder icon, and then I'm going to do service, click enter, and then just drag this in there. Say move. So now the service folder contains the this dashboard service. So now let's go into this dashboard service, and now I can just shrink this a little bit and just collapse this. So in that service, we have to create all the methods or function. And this function, what they're gonna do is they're just gonna reach out to the backend to get the data that we need, right? And believe it or not, even though this dashboard, like this UI admin dashboard, has a lot of information in it, we literally have to call just a few endpoints from the actuator from the backend to create this dashboard. So you can already see how powerful this actuator is, because we will pretty much be using like 3, maybe 4 of the endpoints that the actuator has, and we can already build like a super nice looking dashboard, and this dashboard has like very useful information about our application. So the first thing I want to do here in this service is to, I need to rename this as well. I'm just going to call it dashboard service. So we have to bring in the HTTP client. So we're going to use the HTTP client to make HTTP calls to the backend. Okay, so and the way to do the injection is to create a private field inside of the constructor, and I'm just going to call it HTTP, and it's going to be of type HTTP client. Okay, so make sure this HTTP client is coming from Angular common HTTP. So now that we have this client, we can actually use it to make HTTP calls to the backend. Now there's one last thing we have to do before I finish this video. We have to bring in the HTTP client module as well. So let's go back and let's go to the app module. And this is how you tell Angular that you need to use the HTTP module. So we're going to do HTTP client module. And let's see if I can import that. And it's supposed to come from the same package. So Angular common HTTP, and that's HTTP client module. So now we can close this. So at this point, we can then use this HTTP client and the functions that we're going to create here to actually reach the backend. And we're going to continue in the next lecture. So before we actually start writing methods, we need to know where we're going to send those requests. So we need to put in the URL of the backend. So here, I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it server_URL. And I'm just going to set it equal to some string, right? So we don't know what this string is going to be yet. Well, we kind of know. So let's go back to the environment. So I'm going to put this into this environment here, not in the prod one, because this is for prod. And I'm going to actually show you how you can do a configuration for different environments. So whenever the app is being deployed in production, it's going to use some values, or the values in the production environment. But right now we are not in production, we're in development, so I'm gonna use these other ones here. So in there, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna introduce a new attribute into this object here. So I'm gonna put a comma and I'm just gonna call it server, oops, I need lowercase here, server URL. And then I'm just gonna set it equal to our server URL. And you already know it's HTTP :// oops, localhost. And I think we're running on, what are we running on? Let me check real quick. So here's the backend. I have the backend running, by the way. So backend is running on 9000. So I'm gonna set the port number to 9000, and I know everything is gonna go under actuator. Okay, so this is gonna be the base URL for our environment. So now I can use that in here. Just reach out to the environment. So I'm gonna do environment dot, and you can see server URL here. Okay, so now we know where we're sending this request. So let's go down and put our first function. So the first one is going to be to get HTTP traces. So get HTTP traces. And it's not going to take anything, and it's going to return an observable because we're making a call to the backend. And I've explained this before, and hopefully you guys already know what it is, but observable is a very interesting concept, or promise. It's a very interesting concept, and a lot of people have a hard time with it, but it's really, really very simple. So what is an observable? Well, an observable, well, I don't want to say it's a promise because there's already a promise that you have in JavaScript. So some of you might be confused, say, hey, okay, all right, so it's a promise. But basically what it is it's only saying, hey, this piece of code is gonna take some time to run. That's all it is. So for instance, on line 8, right, I have this server URL here. So what the code is gonna do is gonna run from top to bottom. We know that, right? Whenever you have a program, at least in JavaScript and in Java, the program runs from top to bottom. Now what's gonna happen is when the program runs, it can run this instantly. Like the machine or the computer is able to compute this instantly. So it's gonna run this and say, oh, okay, so this URL is supposed to be whatever URL is defined here, which is a string, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's that. But the difference between this line and whatever method we're gonna build here is that this is gonna take some time to execute or to compute. So we have to come up with a way to make for that, right? Or to make up for that. So when we say observable, we technically mean, hey, this piece of code is gonna execute and it's gonna take some time. Just know that. And whenever this code is done executing, let us know. That's all it is. Now, why is this important? It's important because we're gonna make a network call. So when I call this unobservable, I'm technically saying, hey, this is gonna make a call to over the network, and we know that's not gonna be instant because it depends on so many variables, even the cables that's being used between the two computers. So that's what this is doing. Let's say this was an actual URL on the internet. Let's say the actual server or the backend was running on AWS. So we would have to make a call all the way to the AWS data center where this server lives. So we have so many things to do. We have to find the route, then we have to go over the internet, then we have to go to this different server that's gonna say, hey, this name, which is like http.backend.com, is actually for IP address, blah, 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 and some IP address. And then you have to find this computer on the internet. So this is a network call. It's gonna take some time to execute. So what this observable means is that, hey, this is gonna take some time to execute. Just when it's done executing, give us a notification or let us know when it's done. That's all it is. I hope you guys understand. So here in the observable, we have to, it's a generic, which means we have to specify the return type. So now I'm gonna put any. Okay, so now I can start the method, and that's how that's just the syntax on how to do this using Angular. You put the name of the method like you would, and then you put the return type is gonna be an observable, and you pass in what type of data we should expect. And then here, all we have to do is to call the HTTP that we brought in, and then select the type of request we're gonna make. In my case, is a GET request. And then here, I'm just gonna pass in where I wanna make this GET request. Okay, so which means we have to pass in the URL. So here, I'm just gonna say, well, I'm gonna use this syntax so that I can match variable with string. That's all that is, with the backtick and then the $sign open and close curly braces. So I can put an actual variable, and then I'm gonna add some string to it. So I'm gonna say this is gonna go to HTTP trace. Okay, so this is the URL to get all the HTTP trace. So what the system is going to do is that it's going to run this function and say, oh, this is an observable. Of course it is, because we're making an HTTP request, because this is going to take some time. The computer is not able to compute this instantly because it's going to go over the network, and I just explained it has to go to this computer. So it's going to take some time to execute just this line. So that's why it's an observable or a premise or whatever they might name it, but it's the same concept. It's gonna take some time. And another very interesting thing about an observable is that once you have the observable like this, we can subscribe to it. So since this is an observable, like this GET, you can see it returns an observable. We have to subscribe so that we're notified. It's like it's a subscription. So if I do that, you can see we have pipe, which is something very interesting, which is what you would use if you want to like modify the data on the fly before you actually return it. And then we have subscribe, which is the most important. Subscribe means whenever there is, or this code is executed, there is a response back, let us know, notify us. If you don't have this subscribe here, the request won't even be made. So whenever I use this method, because I'm not subscribing here, I'm just making the call. So whenever I use this in the class, if I don't subscribe to it, this code will not run because there's no subscriber. So there's no point in running this code because there's no one to tell, hey, this code ran or anything like that. So that's what that is. And of course, we're getting an error, and that's because I have to return this. Okay, so I hope you guys understand this. Again, in this whole video, I just created just this one function, so we're gonna go a little bit faster, but I just want to make sure you understand what those things are doing. So just a quick, at least in my personal experience, when I was new to software development, I had a lot of hard time when I first started, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because the people that I was following, or the people that were explaining those things to me, they really stuck with the actual convention. So they didn't explain it using like plain English or give you like a very, very basic example. So that's why sometimes when you watch a tutorial or you go to school, you're in class or something like that, you think that computer science is kind of hard, but it's not. It's really not. And at least in my experience, I hope that the people that I had to learn from the very beginning, I wished they did a better job, which is what I wish, but it didn't happen. So I had some hard time, and it wasn't until later that I was like, oh my god, this is so easy. So that's what this is doing. So every time you're gonna make a request, either to like read a file sometimes, or make a request over the internet, or something that's going to take some time. It doesn't have to be necessarily like an HTTP request. There are many different operations in software development that's going to take time. And that's why we need this idea or concept of observable and promise and things like that. So in the next lecture, we're going to continue again. We're going to go a little bit faster because we're really going to be like repeating this with different endpoints. So I'll see you guys in the next one.
Right, so you saw the power of Spring Boot Actuator, and we just add the dependency, and then we can tell which endpoints that we want to be exposed. Now, for this course, what you will actually build is a fully fledged web application using Angular. So using TypeScript and Angular, and you build the actual dashboard, right? So the reason why we're doing this is to give you multiple ways for you to practice your skills, because this is what employers are after. But obviously, there are other ways that we could actually have these awesome dashboards, and that is using, for example, Grafana, right? So we can take all of those metrics that we expose using Spring Boot Actuator, and then have Grafana display all of these nice dashboards. So I'm going to leave a link on the description of this video where you can go and follow along and learn more about it. If you're new to my channel, subscribe to my channel so I can keep on bringing you content like this. If you're not part of the Amigoscode community, go ahead and join. I would love to see you there. Comment down below and let me know what you thought about this video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum.